On today's talk, the next part of my series on constructed measures, what I'll be talking about is this idea of an outcome space. An outcome space is the next component we want to think about when constructing and developing assessments for different constructs. The outcome space is this idea of what what are the kind of types of values that we will get directly from our items. So what are the responses? Or how do we get a score? These are kind of the two questions we can think about when thinking about the idea of an outcome space. And a lot of times on surveys and psychological assessments, the outcome space is pretty well defined and commonly utilized in response to options such as I strongly disagree, I disagree, I give a neutral response, I give an agree response, I give a strongly agree response. So they are outcome space for the types of values and responses that we get to items or stimuli are just these given fixed statements in response to some question. Other times you have true or false. You have true, false ratings. Sometimes you have satisfied versus not. And we can go through so many different types of ways of developing just dichotomizations or graded responses, but one of the kind of more powerful ways we can think about this is what is the appropriate type of response for the given construct that we're measuring. And a lot of times it is giving a graded response. We're just giving a yes or no to a statement, and that is correct. And that can be an appropriate way of getting information about a construct. In educational assessment, sometimes we have this idea of a rubric. And a rubric can be a very important way when dealing with when you have assessments that you require raters, or especially in performance assessments. Well, how do we obtain values of like someone got a 0 or a 1 or a 2 or a 3? Well, how do we give a description for each of these values that is representative of differences in the skill or in the performance or in the construct? We can define what those are. And we can give criteria with which raters can use to help in their judgments and help with their development of these ratings. And that's one of the things I want to impart is the idea of the outcome space is very straightforward in that it really is is the scale of the values that we're going to get from our items and from our assessment. One of the things we'll do next is when we think about something called a measurement model is thinking about, well, how does this outcome space and how does this responses then relate to our construct? And so for today, it's a very simple, straightforward idea of thinking what is the appropriate type of response and appropriate scale of the response for a given construct and for a given item. And making a definitive case for what that is. We'll go through the process for how to build that argument in more detail later. But for now, thinking of the very simple idea of that outcome space is what are the values and potential values that we can get from our items or from our assessment that we will then use to make decisions and inform our inferences. And I look forward to building on this idea because it moves on to some really interesting concepts and how we can use them and utilize them for measurement purposes.